Hey everyone, and welcome back to Titanic. Last time we experienced the sinking of Titanic through the eyes of a first-class passenger. This time around we are going to experience it through the eyes of Second Officer Charles Lightoller. Now, Charles Lightoller is quite a formidable figure if you believe his own writing and everything that's been documented about him. But he was on Titanic as a second officer, which means that he was quite a senior member of the complement, and he is the most senior officer to have survived the whole ordeal. But he wasn't actually on deck when they struck the iceberg. He was in his cabin, which was, if I'm counting the windows correctly, right behind here. This was his cabin right here, and he was asleep at the time. Or actually, he was in bed. He was just about to go to sleep. He had just turned over the watch to First Officer Murdoch, who was on deck at the time of the striking of the iceberg. So by the time he came out on deck, they had already hit the iceberg, and they had already pretty much determined that the ship was going to sink, although no one actually ever told him, and for the longest time he believed that the ship would actually survive, even though he was loading and launching lifeboats. But anyway, as Lightoller went to bed, he actually felt the impact of the iceberg. He almost instinctively knew that it had been an iceberg. He went out on deck, but seeing that everything seemed to be well in hand, he returned to bed because he felt that if he was needed, people would be looking for him in his cabin, because that's where he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be asleep and off duty. So he figured that if people needed him, they would search for him in his cabin, so that's where he remained, until Fourth Officer Joseph Boxall retrieved him from there, alerted him to the fact that the ship was indeed in serious trouble and that they were going to launch lifeboats. Lightoller was put in charge of the port side of the ship for launching the lifeboats. Murdoch, First Officer Murdoch, was in charge of the right side. Now, as I said, Lightoller was the most senior officer of the on board Titanic who survived, which means sadly that Mr. Murdoch, First Officer, did not, which is quite a shame because he was on duty as the ship struck the iceberg, so his insights and his testimony would have been quite invaluable at the inquiries and later on. But on a side note, the man who was at the helm at the time did survive, as did one of the lookouts. So as it is, we have plenty of first-hand accounts of what the actual collision was like. Anyway, Lightoller was in charge of preparing and launching the lifeboats on this side. Now, at first, only the order to prepare lifeboats had been given. There is a very distinct difference between the order to evacuate a ship and the order to abandon a ship. Evacuate means an orderly procedure in an orderly fashion, according to a very set out protocol or procedure. Abandoning ship means every man for himself and try to save yourself. So they were preparing to give the order to evacuate ship, and Lightoller began swinging out lifeboats, and by the time they were swung out as number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 was, and here goes number 6. There's a number here on here as well, probably on the front. Yeah, that's 6. By the time they were swung out, Lightoller went up to the captain and said, shouldn't we get the women and children into the lifeboats? And Captain Smith, said yes. Now, Lightoller at the time interpreted that order as women and children only. And he has faced quite a bit of scrutiny and criticism for that, because he did launch lifeboats half filled. As soon as there were no more women and children in sight on deck, he would give the order to launch the lifeboat and leave the men, there were still plenty of men standing here, he left them behind. But Lightoller didn't really do this out of malice or stubborn compliance to an ancient and somewhat backwards tradition, possibly, of only saving women and children. He actually had a plan. There is an access door at D-deck. I'm just going to go there really quickly because luckily it is available on this model of Titanic. When you go all the way down along the grand staircase to towards D-deck. This is the first class lounge. This is the sort of entry area for first class passengers as they enter the ship. And this is where they actually entered. This is the first class entry point to quite big double doors on D-deck, which is the first row of portholes on the black part of the hull, if you want a point of reference. These could be opened and would provide plenty of access to the outside. So Lightoller had the idea of sending some men down, opening those doors, and using rope ladders to actually lower more passengers into the boats from there. Now, why did he do that? Why not just put everyone in the boats as you're launching them? Well, in the movie, the very famous 1997 movie Titanic by James Cameron, Lightoller is presented there as a bit of a nervous, twitchy fellow. He's actually in the movie. He's the guy pointing a pistol at people, threatening quite cold-heartedly to shoot them. He was portrayed as a little bit of a caricature in that movie. He was a very brave and quite an honourable man, who later served with distinction in the First World War, although he may or may not have committed war crimes. The verdict is still out on that one. But he was a very honourable man, and later on he helped evacuate survivors of the British Expeditionary Force from Dunkirk during the Second World War. Even when he was retired, he volunteered his own private yacht to retrieve soldiers, and he successfully evacuated 130 soldiers on his 21-person motor yacht as he was being strafed and bombed by German fighter planes. So he was definitely a very courageous man, and it doesn't seem like the kind who would just stubbornly not allow men into the lifeboats. So he definitely had a plan, and the reason he didn't fully load lifeboats right here and instead wanted to load them from the double doors as they were in the water was that at the time there were some concerns about whether the davits could actually hold the full lifeboats. That's where I was going with, talking about Lightoller being a bit of a twitchy fellow in that movie. In the movie, he is seen saying something along the lines of, "We were afraid of the weights; these boats may buckle." Now, in reality, he was afraid that the davits would not hold the weight, because previous davits, earlier models, were a bit. It was a bit dangerous to fully load a lifeboat and then swing it out and lower it. So he was a bit apprehensive about that. But he and some other officers who had the same concerns were unaware that the life of the davits had instead been updated and were fully capable of supporting and launching fully loaded lifeboats. So that's quite a sad affair because, as it turns out, his plan to fully load the lifeboats failed. The men he sent down the first class staircase to open these doors, we don't know exactly what happened to them, but we do know that the doors were never opened. He sent around 10 men to open the doors and guide people through them, but the doors were never opened, and we have to assume that these 10 men drowned as they tried to fulfill their orders. Furthermore, Lightoller had expressly ordered the lifeboats not to row away, and instead stay near the ship, ready to prepared to take on more survivors through the access ports, the portways. But they disobeyed. Many of them were afraid that they would be sucked down with the ship. Many were afraid of being swamped by survivors, and we know of at least one lifeboat that actually willfully disobeyed a direct order to not row away. They were rowing away. Lightoller or some other officer, we don't know exactly who, ordered them, shouted at them, used a whistle to indicate that they had to return, and we know from survivor testimonies that they did hear those orders, but the man in charge of the lifeboat chose to ignore them, opting instead for rowing away from the ship out of fear of being either sucked down or swamped. So all in all, Lightoller's plan failed, but it was quite a sensible one at the time, considering that he thought that the davits would not support the full weight of a fully loaded lifeboat. So, right around now, all the lifeboats will have been launched. There is just one which is just being swung out. This is number 16, 14, 12. This is lifeboat number 12 going down. You can see number 18 right there and 16 already having rowed away. And right about now, Lightoller's task is completed. He has launched the lifeboats. Well, almost. This one is on its way down. He has launched the lifeboats on the port side of the deck. Murdoch is actually... He's probably finished loading the lifeboats on this side by now, so things were going rather smoothly. Not a single launch failed, as, you know, I mentioned Lusitania last time. You need only look at her to get an idea of how miserably the launching of lifeboats can fail, and what consequences that has for the people inside. Right about now, Lightoller has completed successfully his task, but there is one more thing to do. Right forward on the ship, there is another lifeboat. Actually two, but one of them was launched pretty quickly. There are collapsible lifeboats right here. One of them was in here with the emergency cutter having been swung out for the entire duration of the voyage. The cutter is always swung out even when, you know, not evacuating, just so you have a lifeboat on standby for a man overboard situation or whatever else you might need it for. So there was a collapsible here, which went, you know, after the cutter had swung out, had been launched. But there's another one up here, on the deck, on the roof of the officers' quarters. And now, launching this one was quite difficult, because the davits don't reach up there. You have to manually lower it from that deck. That may seem like an impossible task, but they actually had a very clever solution for that. They could use a system of ropes and pulleys to lower it gradually towards the deck, and bodily haul it towards an empty set of davits and launch it from there. The only downside to that plan was that the ropes and pulleys I mentioned, meant for lowering this lifeboat onto the deck, were actually stored all the way up front in the bow section. And at this point, where this lifeboat had to be lowered, that part of the ship was already well underwater. There was no chance of retrieving those tackles and ropes and pulleys, so they had to improvise. Lightoller ordered to use oars and planks and whatever else they might find to create a ramp of sorts. A very flimsy one. It was just a few oars and a few planks. And they would try to bodily lower the lifeboat along those planks towards the deck, put it inside a set of davits, and then lower it over the side. Now we can actually go up here. There are ladders right here, and I believe another set, yeah, right there, which you could use to get on top of the officers' quarters roof. So that's where we're going next. By the way, this staircase right here would lead down to A deck and then B deck, and Lightoller would use this to measure how far the ship had sunk. He could actually count the steps on the stairway, and he would use that to see how much steps he had left until the water reached this deck. And he was quite worried by how quickly the water seemed to rise at the end. As you can see, even while we've been talking, it's risen a few steps already. So it's going quite quickly now. This bit is already, yeah, the bridge is going. So we need to make our way up here. Now we can't use this ladder, sadly, but there is a way around. We can cheat by doing this. Hang on. There we go. We are now on the roof of the officers' quarters. Right in time to see this lifeboat being lifted from its stocks and prepared to be lowered manually. Now the planks, the oars have not been animated. They're not here, but imagine there being a sort of makeshift ramp. But sadly, the planks and oars broke, as you can also see in the movie, and the lifeboat landed upside down, actually trapping one of the Marconi wireless operators underneath, I think. Was it the lookout? No, I think it was the Marconi wireless operator, the radio operator, underneath, who actually survived. The boat is being floated away. It's still floating. It didn't sink, but it is upside down, not ideal. Now, Lightoller at this point, he had a choice. Do I go aft towards where 1,500 people still were on board Titanic. She went down with 1,500 people still on board, and try and help them without any lifeboats whatsoever being there, knowing full well that the ship is going to sink, or knowing all those things. Do I stay here near the lifeboats, near, the other lifeboats as well, being around here, and do I try to coordinate the survival effort of the people that did manage to get on board the lifeboats? I think Lightoller was a bit of a pragmatist, and he was capable of realizing that the people still aboard the ship pretty much didn't have a chance, and that his most, what shall we say, he could be most useful staying around the lifeboats that did manage to get away from the deck. This lifeboat right here, which was being launched, or at least attempted to be launched by First Officer Murdoch, was also floated away from the ship. But Lightoller would have been very much preoccupied with what was going on right here. Now, right about now, that funnel is going to go. Lightoller tried to make his way towards the crow's nest, but as he tried to do that, he was sucked into this grating here. This right here is a vent. Don't be distracted by the funnel going in a bit. This is a vent going straight down to the boiler room for sort of natural ventilation, natural air draft. And he was sucked against this wire grating, which was not very strong, and he very much feared that the grating would give in. And if that would have happened, it would have been goodbye to Mr. Charles Lightoller, because that would have meant certain death. But luckily, at the last minute, he was saved from this certain doom by a blast of hot air which came out, pushed him away, and he managed to get away from the grating. He instinctively started swimming towards the crow's nest, which is just about now going under. But realizing the futility of that, he because he realized that it was sinking as well, he started swimming towards the overturned lifeboat. Now, I may have timed this perfectly, because right around now the funnel is going to come down, which I have seen this before in this game, and this always gives me the creeps. This is quite scary. The funnel is going to give way as the ship is going down. I haven't actually timed this, so it should do it any minute. Bear with me. There we go. Now that was actually pretty scary. So that funnel falling actually produced a wave that pushed the collapsible B away from the ship and pushed Lightoller along with it as well. He ended up right near the upturned collapsible, actually managed to climb aboard it along with other people as well. And they tried to organize some sort of rescue for the people around the collapsible. He managed to find his footing, to stand upright, help other people stand upright. And this is the view that Second Officer Charles Lightoller would have had of Titanic actually going down. Now, up until the moment that the wreckage was found of Titanic, many people believed, actually all people, the general consensus was that she went down in one piece. There were people who said that they saw the ship breaking up, that they heard it, or that they otherwise knew that the ship had broken apart, but they were, on the whole, not believed. This is very much because of Lightoller in a, for a large part. Because Lightoller was the most senior officer at the time. People assumed that he knew what he was talking about, and that he would have known if the ship had, in fact, broken apart. But standing on top of a dingy little collapsible lifeboat, which was upturned, rocking because there had actually been a bit of a swell at this time, and in fact very slowly sinking, drenched because he had been in the freezing cold water, trying to keep it upright. There were a whole line of people aboard this tiny little lifeboat. I'll try and see if I can find a picture of the movie A Night to Remember, which actually shows it quite nicely. He would not have been paying an awful lot of attention to the ship going down. He couldn't have, because trying to keep this boat in an upright position was quite difficult. It was swaying. They had to move their weight from side to side to keep it from actually going under. So he would not have been paying a lot of attention to the ship going down. Now, last time, in the previous episode, when we experienced the sinking as a first-class passenger, we were in one of those lifeboats you can see on the other side of the ship, right between those two davits. You see them. And we could see a side-on profile of the ship as she went down. And even then, with a side profile which should very clearly show the ship breaking up, what we could see was that because of how dark it was, because of the lights going out just before she broke up, because she was already quite low in the water at that time, we could not actually see the breaking up happening very, very good, very well. You would have been very hard pressed to actually see it breaking up, and that was with a perfect side view. Lightoller was in front of the ship, and there she goes, look at that, she's going, and he would not have been able to see if she broke in two. We can see it right now because the model, she's going right now, she's going to break. There we go. We can clearly see it happening, but the deck is illuminated because of how this game engine works. Imagine this happening in pitch black with no lights whatsoever. You would not have been able to actually see anything. Lightoller did not get a good chance to see whether the ship had actually broken apart or not. So, there she goes. For Lightoller, she would have seemed like a big black spot silhouetted against the stars. The black silhouette against the stars would have been the only thing that you would have been able to see from Titanic. Actually, there is one thing. The storm lantern that was suspended from the aft mast was still burning. It wasn't electric like all of the other lights were. It was an actual open flame, well, enclosed in a lantern, and that could still be seen until it too went under. So there she goes. By the time she broke up, as I said, there were still 1,500 people aboard, and you can hear the ship dying, but it's not very difficult to imagine the awful screams that Lightoller must have heard. And he talks about it. He mentions, the sound of people being in the water, being one of the worst things about it. We're not talking 10 people, we're not talking 20 people screaming. 10 or 20 people screaming is loud enough, but 1,500 people ending up in the water as the ship sank from underneath them. And that's it. That's Titanic gone, from the perspective of Charles Lightoller. Now, Lightoller stayed on this upturned collapsible for a good few hours, and he was eventually rescued by another lifeboat. They were hauled aboard another lifeboat, and then a few hours later Carpathia came to their rescue, which I looked it up. It was actually RMS Carpathia. She was a Royal Mail ship. RMS Carpathia came to their rescue, and that's how Lightoller was the senior most member of the entire complement of Titanic to survive the ordeal. Lightoller went on to become quite old. There are some photographs of him. You can actually see him at a very old age with a very charming photograph of him with a smoking a pipe. It's a bit of a strange figure. He was quite prone to embellish his own adventures. He has written a set of memoirs. He has written a book, Titanic and Other Ships. It's a good read, although he may have exaggerated in some things. Only a small portion of that book is about Titanic. It's a lot about other adventures he's had. He's been shipwrecked twice before Titanic. He played a massive prank on the population of Sydney when he was there in Majestic, I think. It may have been another ship, but another ship of the White Star Line. He's done a lot of things, including, I think I mentioned it, rescuing people from the beaches of Dunkirk, as he was being attacked by German bombers and fighters, doing strafing runs. He was a very remarkable man. I'm going to put some pictures of him in this video so you can see who he was, and some stills from the movie A Night to Remember, which is actually, if you're interested in Titanic history, A Night to Remember is actually on YouTube. It's very old. It's from 58, I think, 53, something around there. And you can actually watch it on YouTube. It's a very good watch. It's very realistic, although, as I said, at the time, 58, they still thought that Titanic went down in one piece. So in the movie, you actually see it going down in one piece. That's the only sort of major inaccuracy in that movie. But still, a very good movie to watch. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this rather tragic adventure and trying to get a glimpse of what it would have been like for Second Officer Charles Lightoller to be a part of the Titanic disaster. And right now there's nothing left for us to do but wait for rescue. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you next time, where we're going to experience the sinking of Titanic through the eyes of a third-class passenger. And as you can imagine, knowing the history of Titanic, that may possibly not end as well as the adventure did for Charles Lightoller. But I'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me, and have a good one.